Hey YouTube, it's Justin, aka Demonic Sweaters, and today we're going to be talking about how to program a MIDI controller with Ableton Live. And the reason why I wanted to make this video is some of you may be considering buying something like a Launchkey or something that's specifically designed to work with Ableton Live, and that was me. I was actually considering that myself because, well, I had an Akai controller, which I still do have, but I'm selling it right now. And it's one of the Akai MPK minis that has the pads and everything built on to it. But I was always finding myself pretty unhappy with the way it integrated with Ableton. And I didn't like the fact that I had to open up a software editor to make any changes on the MPK. And I couldn't do that at the same time of opening up Ableton. I would have to close Ableton, then open up the software editor, make a change, close the software editor, then open up Ableton again, and then see if my change worked the way I wanted it to. And so it's just becoming very cumbersome, and not to mention it's a very small controller with very few keys. Now, I also already had this controller to my right, which is a MIDI Plus Classic 49. Now, this is a very simple MIDI controller, and these are not very expensive. However, it does have 49 keys, and they're full size, and it feels pretty nice, and it has 8 faders on it, as well as 8 knobs. And then you can manually type in CC information, control information, and things like that on the actual keys themselves by using the MIDI select button on it. And so what I was thinking, you know, I was almost ready to click the buy now button on one of the launch keys. And then I was like, well, before I spend the money, I'm going to really dig into this thing and see what I can program and how well I can do it with Ableton Live. So I came up with something pretty cool. Using it in a way that you may not think, but you could even use just a regular old MIDI controller like this one. And if you're interested in this exact one, I'll post a link from Amazon down below. But you could use any old MIDI controller and even use it as a control surface for Ableton Live, starting and stopping scenes. You can switch between the scenes, the clips, and all of that things. You can loop, you can record, you can play. You could program all that stuff into any MIDI controller. So it's really not as difficult as it may seem. So I wanted to kind of show you what I did, and maybe this will give you some ideas to how you could program yours. Now, I've seen other tutorials where people show you the very basics of programming MIDI for Ableton, but nobody really got into the details, maybe with the exception of one or two, of how they actually configured their controller to work in a more performance-based situation. So I wanted to do something like that, and it will work as a performance-based situation as well as a, you know, production-based situation, which is more what I'm going to be using it for. All right, so I wanted to give you a quick overview of some of the things that I did on my controller. As you can see here, I have some tape on the controller itself where I wrote in some basically things where I could remember where I mapped everything. Now, this is something you may want to do as well if you don't have a controller that's dedicated or created for Ableton itself. You can use this idea to set up your controller and you know, experiment with different things. And if you ever change anything, you can just put a new piece of tape on there and write whatever you changed on there after you make the change. Now, real quick, just to show you, I have these first 2 keys, like actual keys on the keyboard. These are changing my scenes, and I have S up or S down and S up for scene up, scene down, and then launch scene right there. And so all of the keys, basically the control parts of my MIDI controller, are being used on MIDI channel 1. Now, if I want to just play notes on this keyboard, all I have to do is switch to MIDI channel 2 very easily by pressing this and then going over here and pressing the number 2 and then enter. And then now I'm on, well, that didn't work for some reason, but oh, sorry, I have to press MIDI channel first here, and then 2, enter, and now I'm on MIDI channel 2, as you can see there. And so none of these controls that I have mapped out on the keyboard itself will make any changes. It'll just work as a regular keyboard. But I'm going to get into Ableton itself and show you how I was able to do this. All right, so basically what I'm going to do to show you guys this is start over. I already have this set up for myself, but I wanted to basically start from scratch so you could see what this all entails. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do is make sure you go into your preferences within Ableton. And just so you know, I'm still using Ableton Live 9. You may have Ableton 10, and this probably will be pretty much exactly the same in Ableton 10, maybe some slight, UI differences, but other than that, everything should apply here. Now, so also, just to let you know, I'm using the DirectX audio driver just so I can record my voice at the same time. So there may be some latency in what I'm playing or what you actually hear in this example compared to if I were, running my ASIO driver. But anyway, first off, okay, so let's go into the MIDI link section here. Now, this is very important. If you have a control surface or a MIDI controller that is listed in here, then a lot of times there's not much you're going to need to do other than select it in here. Say you have the Launchkey. Let's just select the Launchkey, and then input, you select the Launchkey there, and output the Launchkey there. But this tutorial is for those of us that don't have Launchkeys. So what we're going to do is actually select none there, and make sure you have input and output under the control surfaces selected as none. Now, you'll notice down here, you'll see my USB MIDI Classic 49. That is my MIDI Plus Classic 49. And I have for input, I have track set to on and remote set to on, as well as output on and remote on. Now, remote is basically the same thing as a control surface. It just words it differently. So this is a little bit confusing. If you have your control surface mapped up here, you don't need to do it down here. And likewise, if you have it down here, you don't need to do it up here. Or you wouldn't want to do it up here because sometimes if you have both, it will make the MIDI behavior of Ableton kind of strange and cause some conflict. So if you're using a MIDI Plus or some other type of controller that isn't listed in the control surfaces of Ableton, select it or set it up the way I have right here. Another thing too is some of these, like for example, like I said before, I had the MPK Mini, and even if I did select it here and selected the input and output as that, yeah, some functions would work, but it wasn't great. The way it mapped things, I didn't really like, and that's one of the reasons why I'm getting rid of that thing. I was never happy with the way that it functioned in Ableton, and being so small and having to use an external editor to change the settings on the controller, I figured I'd be much better off just using the MIDI Plus. And since I did this, I'm much happier with this than I was with the Akai. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. Make sure you get that set up first. And once you do that, you should be good to go. And okay, so a couple of things that you're going to want to note is when we go into right up here on the upper right-hand corner of Ableton, you'll see this MIDI button. And basically what this does is it gives us the way that we can map our controller. Now there's a couple of things over here on the right that are really important to making a successful Launchpad or Launchkey type controller. And that is right here, we have this up arrow. And if we look down here on the lower left in this area, anything you hover your mouse over, Ableton will tell you what it is. And this is our scene up button. And that is our scene down button right there. And this is scene select, which basically goes by any number that's in there. It'll switch to that scene. And then right here we have scene launch. Now, if you don't know what that means, all of these over here are our scenes. So let me get out of the mapping section. All these numbers down here are our scenes. And basically what that will do is if I press play, it'll launch all the clips that are lined up horizontally next to that number. And so once we have our scene selection tool mapped on our controller, then we can switch between all of our different scenes and launch them via the controller. So that is one of the main things that the Launchkey will do. So let's go ahead and start setting this up. But first off, before I do that, I want to get rid of my audio channels because I'm just going to be working with MIDI here. You could do this with audio as well. Well, actually, okay, let's leave it how it is. Let's do 2 MIDI and 2 audio, and that should be good enough for this tutorial because it is nice to have some audio in there as well. So let's go ahead and leave that. And what I'm going to do is, first off, I'm going to put in a couple of MIDI instruments. Oh, well, actually, before that even, I'm going to save this. I'm going to go up here to Save Live Set As. And I'm going to go into my Ableton folder. And I'm going to call this Classic 49 Template 2. All right, so once I did that, I'm going to first drag a drum rack over here to my first MIDI channel, and then I'm going to drag some other audio or some other instrument plugin over to my second MIDI channel. So let's just use like the sampler or something like that. Let's find like a bass sound or something. All right, let's try this one. This one's pretty cool. Okay, so we have a sampler there, drum rack here. Let's put in some type of drum sounds in the drum rack. I really love the 707 kit, so I'm going to use that. Drag that down into here. One of my favorite drum machines ever, and I love the Ableton implementation of it. I think it sounds really good, and you can do a lot of stuff with it if you start to add some plugins and stuff in there. But anyway, okay, so let's save again. Now, one thing you may want to do, like say you don't want to have any instruments in your template, you don't have to add them in there, but there is less stuff that you can map, particularly for MIDI. You can't map the faders, as in the volumes, for the individual channels until you have some kind of plugin in there, because it doesn't give you a fader until there is an instrument or a VST in that slot. So, you know, you could do it like this, or create 8 audio channels, or however you want to do it. You could have multiple templates, but, you know, I think this is pretty decent, you know, just a 4-channel template. You can always add up to 8 if you want, or even more. But for this tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and stick with 4. So let's save it again. Okay, so now here's where the fun starts. We're going to go into the MIDI mapping right here. We just click on MIDI. First off, let's assign our scene launch and scene select, scene up, scene down, and all that stuff. So scene launch, over here on my MIDI controller, I have that set right here on basically the 3rd key on the actual controller. So I'm just going to press, all I'm going to do is just click on scene launch and then press that key. And now you can see over here, note D1 for scene launch is mapped to launching the scene. So let's go to scene up, press scene up again, or not again, but press scene up on the controller where I have that labeled. And then same with scene down. Now for this one, the scene select, before I had mapped this particular fader on my controller, but the one thing I realized after I did this, this one I don't think is 100% needed, because you could use your scene up and scene down commands basically to achieve the same thing. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and just map it again to the same fader, since I already have it labeled on my controller like that. All right, so that part is done. Now, what's really cool, once you can select your scene, so if I go out of the MIDI map feature and I just show you, I can press the keys, and now you can see me moving between the different scenes. Now what we could do is actually set it up so when you press a certain key, it'll play only one clip, as in, you know, whatever you have in one of these little sections here, it'll only play that clip of whatever scene is selected. Now the way to do this is we go into the MIDI mapping feature again, and now these little play buttons on each track, that's what does that. So I'm going to go ahead and map these to the corresponding keys on my MIDI controller that I have labeled. Okay. And now let me just give you let's just do a quick demonstration. So, all right, now, so what I was saying, so I have my first scene selected, and since I mapped each individual clip using these play buttons here, now I can just launch individual clips like so. And say I wanted to stop my second clip, what I could do is select my second scene, go to scene down, and now press number 2. but I had that record armed, but if that record wasn't armed, then I could just stop it. Okay, so the next thing that you may want to do is you could actually map your records. So that way you could go in and play, you could trigger a clip and then record a little loop. Now, a way to do this, one great way to record loops on time and not have to worry about trimming the ends is basically you could just go into the section and put in insert MIDI clip, and that'll put in a blank MIDI clip. So at that point, what you'd want to do is actually record this like you're overdubbing. So in order to do that, we're going to have to map this record button, which is the session record button, which toggles between playback and overdub recording for clips. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to go into our MIDI map again. Now let's select that. We're going to go ahead and map that record button where I have it labeled. And while I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and map the rest of my transport here. I have my stop right there, my play button right here, and then I could turn my metronome on and off, which is right there. And then I also have tap tempo, which is right here. All right, so the next thing we want to do is to be able to record arm our different tracks. So let's go ahead and do that by clicking the record arm button. And then let's go ahead and do that where I have them labeled on my controller. Okay. Let's get out of MIDI mapping mode and put in some more MIDI clips here. Oh, this is audio, so I can't do it there. But MIDI, you can insert the blank MIDI clips that way. So let's go ahead and play. Now we could use our transport over here to play. And now let's go ahead and record arm track 2, like so. And we have a blank clip there. So let's make sure that clip is selected by pressing play on that clip. And I actually made a mistake there because I had the wrong scene selected, but let's remove that. Oops. So let's go up to the correct scene. Let me stop this clip. That was a little annoying. So let's go up to the correct scene. Okay, right there. And then now what I could do is I can actually hit record and overdub on top of that loop. So first off, let's test. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and record. All right, and there you go. You can see it records to the loop. And of course, my timing is off, like I said, since I have the thing going through the Windows driver, the audio going through the Windows driver rather than ASIO. But this gives you, I hope this gives you the idea or the picture that you're able to create basically your own way that you can launch all these different clips and map the controller the way to your liking. Now, you may want to play with it a bit and, map it out how you like it. But for now, this is okay for me. What I could do, let me show you one that I already did. Let me save this real quick, and I'm going to open up a different project here. And this one I have a few parts worked out already. And you can see how I'm able to control it using my MIDI controller. I'm not really going to try to overdub or play just because of the timing issues, but let's go ahead and start. We can go to launch clip. And again, you can see how I can move up and down through the scenes right here. Now let's go ahead and launch the next clip. Now, another thing that I did on this is I actually mapped out all my volumes, to the faders here. So I have all of my individual volumes. And in order to do that, you just do the same thing. You click on MIDI, and then you click on the fader you want to map, and then you just move the fader on the controller. It's really easy. Okay, so as you'll notice, I have my track number 5 selected for recording. I can always switch that by pressing one of these keys that I have labeled here for record select. But if I play outside of my mapped range out here, you'll hear the actual keyboard. And if I wanted to play all of the keys, all I have to do is switch to my MIDI channel to MIDI channel 2 or any other channel. And now all of the keys will work and not function as a controller anymore. Now this may not be as ideal as if I had a controller that had, you know, like buttons on it where I could map all this stuff to. But, you know, it's still pretty cool. If you have a controller that has buttons, then you can map those, you know, your transport and your record selects and all that stuff on the buttons. And it's probably a little bit better that way than having to use the keys. But since I don't have the buttons, and, you know, it's really not bad. You get used to it. If you start just playing with it that way, you can get used to, you know, having the keys as your transport and record select and all of that. It's still much better than using the mouse and the keyboard on the laptop. And especially if you have, you know, right now I have my MIDI controller over to my left and my computer is like to the right. But if I had my computer set up here in front of the MIDI controller, then I could see what I'm doing in real time with the MIDI controller. And it actually is pretty easy to use that way. And you could do stuff on the fly and create music. And it's a lot of fun, you know. So it just goes to show that you don't need to spend, you know, the $200 or $150 on the Launchkey if you don't have one, you know, or if you just had a cheaper MIDI controller like this Classic 49. You can use that in a Launchkey style MIDI controller as well, and it works just fine. You just have to be clever about the mapping. You know, it takes a little bit of experimentation and figuring out what you like and how you can work, but it can be done. And a lot of times what is good to do is just create like a blank Ableton session and then do all your mapping and everything, and then just save that as a template. And then you can just open up that template and then work from there on all of your future projects, and everything's already set up and ready to go, or at least pretty close. So anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Feel free to ask any questions or leave comments down below. What do you think about the MIDI mapping features in Ableton Live? Have you done something similar? Let me know about that too. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do, and check out my other videos, and I'll see you guys really soon. Bye.